Starry River, Chapter 4. Just like that, Randy became the chore boy at the Inn of Clear Sky. He was not used to doing chores, so when he found a broom in his hand, he had to watch Paillet to learn how to sweep. He watched her so closely as she washed and dusted that she was convinced he was mocking her and said in annoyance, "Go clean that room by yourself." As he left, Paillet added, "Do a good job. It's the best room in the inn." Just by her tone, Randy could tell that the room was a point of pride. Instead of plain wood, the couch bed in this room was carved with ribbon-tailed birds and plum blossoms. There was a matching table, and the warm-colored wood shone as if it had been dipped in honey. Silk scrolls hung on the wall, and lacquered, painted gourds stood as vases. Randy sneered. "Best room in the inn," he scoffed to one of the painted peonies. "It's not even good enough for one of my father's servants." But as the words fell from his lips, he froze, and his face darkened. Without another word, Randy spent the rest of the time vigorously polishing and dusting, flinging the dirt from the window, as if to rid the room of any of his lingering words. When he finished, the room was spotless, and even Paillet could not find any fault with it. Wasted work, though, Randy often thought. With the exception of old Mr. Shant, who did not even stay at the inn but just came by to eat every day, there were no guests at the Inn of Clear Sky. Randy watched carefully day after day, hoping another merchant or trader would arrive so that he could leave this poor pitiful village with its crying sky. It could barely be called a village, really. Most of the homes were empty and abandoned, and the people who lived there now would barely fill even the dining room of the inn. Everyone leaves. Villagers, guests, everyone. Even my brother left, Paillet had said sadly to Randy. But she had added, with a note of happiness, "Even you'll go someday." I hope someday soon, Randy had thought. But it was not to be today. In the morning, Randy awoke to the strident crow of the neighbor's rooster, and looked out the window. As he expected, the hot sun shone brightly on the undisturbed yard, and there was not a house or a hoofprint visible. A horse or a hoofprint visible. Randy sighed and washed his face. Perhaps tomorrow a guest would come, a guest with a cart that he could crawl into. "You're late," Master Chow said, as Randy and Paillet walked down the stairs. "We have a new guest." "A new guest?" Paillet said in surprise. Randy was also surprised. The sky's moaning had kept him awake most of the night, but he had heard no one arrive. "Did he come in the night?" "No," Master Chow said. "Arrived early this morning, alone, on foot, and paid for a room for a whole month." "She said she may stay longer." "She?" Randy said. The word sputtered from him in surprise. It was unheard of for a woman to be staying alone at an inn, much less one who came on foot and stayed longer than a night. "Yes," Master Chow said, "and she wants her breakfast brought to her room. Make sure you ask her if she wants all her meals there." "What is she doing here?" Paillet asked. "And for so long?" "That's none of our business," Master Chow said, quickly shaking his head at Paillet. "She paid for her room and meals. That's all that concerns us." Paillet looked at Randy, but he did not return her gaze. He hoped he looked bored and uninterested, even though inside, he was as curious as she was. Chapter 5. "I'll help you bring up the breakfast," Paillet said to Randy. He wasn't fooled. He knew she just wanted a peek at their new mysterious guest. But he said nothing and handed her the covered cup of tea. The new female guest was standing at the window in the finest room of the inn, the same window Randy had flung dust out of. Her back was toward them, and she stood against the yellow sunlight. The darkness of her silhouette reminded Randy of the moonless sky that cried at him at night. "Your breakfast," Randy said. "Madam." "Madam Chang," the woman said. Her serene voice seemed out of place in the hot room, already baking in the summer sun. "Tell me," Madame Chang said without turning, "what did you name the stone field where the mountain was?" "The stone pancake," Pai said, pleased that this new guest already knew the story. "It was my ancestor who moved the mountain." "Really?" Madame Chang said, as she turned and looked at them. Rindy and Pai gaped. Madame Chang did not look like any woman Rindy had ever seen before. She was not like the painted ladies of the court, who giggled and swayed like flowers as the wind blew. Nor did she resemble a broad-shouldered peasant woman, thick and browned by the sun. Her features were fine and smooth, and as if she had been carved from ivory, and the light of her dark eyes made them shine like stars. She stood with the elegance of a willow tree, and even though she wore the cotton robes of a commoner, both Rindy and Pei felt as if they should kowtow to her. Pindy's eyes were as large as leeches, and it took a moment before Rindy realized that they were both staring. "Master Chow would like to know if you want all of your meals brought to you in your room," Rindy said. "It's cooler than the dining room," Pei said, and then, with an attempt at a grown-up air, "But it's very hot everywhere these days." "Yes, it is," Madame Chang agreed with a smile. "But at least it's not as hot as when there were 6 suns in the sky." "6 suns?" Pei asked. "You don't know the story?" Madame Chang asked, looking at from Pei to Rindy. Both shook their heads. The story of the 6 suns. Long ago, so long that only the sky, mountains, and water can truly remember, 6 suns appeared in the sky. These 6 suns caused great suffering and devastation to the earth. Rain boiled away before ever touching the ground. The trees and plants withered, leaving behind only the scorched earth, burnt and brown. All the villagers were forced to live like worms, crowding into an ancient dark hole in one of the hills. As they began to starve, they also began to despair. But then a rumor began to murmur at night, perhaps sent by the spirit of the mountain above. "The one marked with the power can save you," it whispered. "The one who bears the mark of power can save you." The people looked at one another in confusion until a man stepped forward. His name was Wang Yi, and he was the strongest, bravest, and quickest of all the men. He had already done many great deeds. They said he had tamed the flooding water serpent with just the fierceness of his eyes, and that he had killed a single-toothed earth giant with his mighty strength. But more than that, Wang Yi had an unusual scar on his forehead. It looked like the character Wang, a symbol of power. "It must be Wang Yi whom the spirit of the mountain meant," the people said. "The scar is the mark of power." But when Wang Yi stepped onto the scorched earth and gazed at the 6 suns, he knew his strength and fierceness would not help. He had to stand in the shade of the mountain, for the ground lit by the suns burnt his feet. Everything on earth was suffering. Even the giant tree next to the mountain seemed to be withering. Wang Yi realized that he could not fight the suns. His only hope was to shoot them down from the sky. So he shot his arrows at the suns, pulling his mighty crescent bow so that it made the shape of a full moon. But no matter how powerfully he pulled, the arrows could not reach. Over and over he shot until the shade of the mountain disappeared as the suns moved overhead. Finally, with only 6 arrows left in his case, Wang Yi was forced to dip his feet in water to cool them. He looked down in defeat. It was then that he saw his reflection in the pool. The great lake had shrunk because of the heat, but the shade of the mountain had saved it from completely vanishing. There was still enough water for him to see the 6 suns reflected in it. "I will shoot them here," Wang Yi said. And with his back to the mountain, he quickly placed an arrow in his bow and shot at the reflection of one of the suns. As the arrow flew into the water, a sun sank from the sky. Wang Ying fitted another arrow and shot again. Another sun fell. Immediately the people felt a great change in the temperature. They crawled out from the hole to watch Wang Yi shoot the third sun, and then the fourth. But as everyone else cheered, Wang Yi's wife thought quickly, "If he shoots all the suns," she realizes, "we will be forever in darkness." So knowing better than to disturb her husband's concentration, she crept behind Wang Yi as he prepared his arrow for the fifth sun. With all eyes on Wang Yi, only the mountain saw her as she silently took the sixth and last arrow from his case and swiftly hid it in her sleeve. As a result, after shooting the fifth sun, Wang Yi found his case empty and laid down his bow. And this is why there is now one sun. Well, that one sun is hot enough, Rindy said. The guest room had grown even hotter during the story, and a drop of sweat rolled down his forehead like a falling grain of rice. "That is true," Madame Chang said, as she looked out the window at the dry, yellow earth below. Then she looked again at Pai Yi and Rindy. "Please tell Master Chow. I will take the rest of my meals downstairs with the other guests. I think I would enjoy the company." Rindy didn't think Madame Chang would much enjoy the company of old, slow-witted Mr. Shan, the inn's one regular mealtime guest, but he refrained from saying so. Instead, both he and Pei Yi bowed respectfully and left the room. Chapter 6. "You couldn't teach a pig how to snore," Widow Yan snapped. "I wouldn't have to," Master Chow roared. "I would just let it follow your example." In the garden, Rindy sighed. He was unsure which was worse, the skies wailing at night or the screeching of Master Chow and Widow Yan during the day. For Master Chow and Widow Yan were fighting yet again. He did not know what caused the first argument between the two neighbors or when it had been, but every day was full of their quarrels. Rindy returned to his weeding, though truly it was the snails he was tending. The inn's garden was not really a garden. It was a snail haven. As soon as a green shoot sprang from the earth, snails covered it like a warty plague. Any surviving leaves were also ravaged, and the partially eaten greenery looked like a delicate paper cuttings decorating the dark wall. The only garden that was worse was the one on the other side of the wall. Snails also reveled in Widow Yan's garden. Their shells adorned her plants, like brown berries. The only things more pitiful than Master Chow's and Widow Chan's snails were their insults to each other. A door slammed, and Rindy saw Mei Lan, Widow Yan's daughter, come out of the next house next door, dropping like a magpie with a broken wing. That meant Pei Yi was sure to come out and try to sneak a visit. Rindy knew Pei Yi had formed a secret friendship with the older girl, admiring her like the mother and sisters she didn't have. Mei Ling was pretty and gentle, with long hair tied up smoothly in a woven clasp, and skin like a fresh peach. To little Pai Yi, who went about constantly with bruised knees and tangled hair, Mei Lan seemed a fine lady. And sure enough there was Pei Yi now, taking advantage of her father's distraction, stealing out of the inn and over the low wall. Perfect, Rindy thought wickedly as the girls greeted each other. He began gathering snails and arranging them on the wall. When he was done, Pei Yi would be so annoyed. "Have you heard from Jiming?" Mei Lan asked Pei Yi. "No," Pei Yi said, her voice suddenly full of sorrow. "Well, maybe he is too busy," Mei Ling said, with a sad sort of laugh. "Well, maybe he's in the city having a grand time with a fine job and a wife." "A wife?" Pei Yi exclaimed. "No, Jamie couldn't get married that fast." "One never knows." Maylan said with a shrug. He wouldn't, Peggy almost shouted. And then she said in a soft voice that made Rindy's ears prickle, and he almost stopped organizing the snails, he wouldn't have forgotten about you. The older girl said nothing and looked off into the distance, as if searching for the end of the scorched stone plain that stretched before them. Rindy continued to place the snails on the wall. So far, the snails just spelled out Payee. Maylan, Payee said, could you show me some of your wedding jewelry again? Payee's eager eyes made Maylan smile. Like a flitting bird, she went into the house, returning with a dark red wooden box with vases of peonies painted on the side. Sitting down, Maylan carefully placed the box on her lap, and with an air of grand formality, drew back the lid. Payee squealed in excitement and pleasure. Rindy was pleased too, for now the snails were spelling Payee is a. This will be for my hair, Mayling said, fastening a gilded metal comb ornamented with flowers made of pearls and jewels into Payee's hair. The ornament sparkled with 100 rainbows in the brilliant sun. Maylan dangled glittering gold pieces. These will be my earrings. Oh, can I see that again, too? Payee said, pointing to an embroidered silk purse. Ah, my treasure of treasures, Maylan said, taking out carefully with grand reverence. I will not get married without it. It was a jade bracelet. As Payee proudly finished arranging the snails, which now said, Payee is a melonhead, in bold characters on the wall. He looked up and saw Maylan holding a simple, smooth circle of green without carvings and extra adornments. The vivid emerald green color shone through to the edges of the bracelet, and it had a beauty and an elegance that even in the harsh sun couldn't cheapen. Rindy admired it more than Maylan's ornate hair comb. Now, tell me the story too, Payee begged. What story? Rindy thought. How could there be a story about a bracelet? It's not much of a story, Maylan said. I don't know why you like to hear it so often. I just do, Payee said. Please. Maylan laughed, and Rindy, in spite of himself, listened. The story of the jade bracelet. When I was about your age, my father became very ill. He knew he was dying, and one day he called me over to his bed and gave me this jade bracelet. It had been his mother's and his grandmother's before that, and he'd been keeping it for me. But now it was mine. It's part of your wedding dowry, he said to me, for when you get married someday. It's very, very valuable, so make sure you take good care of it. Soon afterward he died, and I began to wear the bracelet all of the time. It was too big for me, and it was too fine to wear every day, but I couldn't help it. It reminded me of my father, and seeing the glossy green circle on my arm made me feel like he was still with me. But my mother would yell at me. You are going to lose it, she said. Put it away someplace safe. But I didn't listen to her. Instead, I wore it all day, even to sleep, hiding it under my sleeve so she wouldn't see. But she was right, because one day I did lose it. I wasn't sure how or when, but when I realized it was gone, I felt as if my father had died again. I didn't say a word to my mother, who would have been horrified as well as angry, but just waited till nightfall to sneak out of the house to look for it. I had lost it when I was feeding the chickens? Had I lost it when I was feeding the chickens? Or working in the garden? Or horrors, when I was getting water from the well? In the moonlight, I searched on my hands and knees throughout the yard, tears streaming down my face. As the moon began to swim in the sky, I started to despair, and I couldn't help myself sniffling. What's wrong with you? A voice said. It was the cowboy, your brother, Jiming. He was sitting on the garden wall in the silver light of the moon and looking at me as if I were a curious animal. He knew I wasn't supposed to talk to him because he was a chow boy, but I didn't care. My misery overwhelmed my pride and anger. I lost my bracelet! I almost wailed. Well, can you stop crying about it? He said, and motioned to the inn where a loud howling echoed. My baby sister's been crying and crying for hours, and I came out here to get away from it. I'll stop crying when I find my bracelet, I said to him. Fine, he said, and jumped down from the wall. He got down next to me and started to help me look. If it's the only way to get some peace around here. So we crawled in the grass like two crickets in the night. Neither of us said much, but even as we searched in silence, I was grateful he was there. I had always been told that the chow boy and his family were awful, but right then, with the round moon glowing above, he didn't seem so bad. And when Jiming found the bracelet next to the sleeping rooster, I knew he was not bad at all. Is this it? He asked, holding the bracelet in the air so that it mirrored the circle of the moon. I was so happy. I jumped up and I hugged him, and then I laughed because he looked so surprised. As soon as the bracelet was in my hands, I ran inside to put it someplace safe, without even saying goodbye. But as I left, we knew we were friends. I was a baby then, Pei said proudly. My crying helped you and Jiming become friends. Yes, Meilan said, and we've been friends all these years, though we had to keep it a secret from our parents. They probably don't like us being friends either, Pei said. No, Mei said absently. She held the bracelet before her as if she could see her future through its hole. Softly, to herself, she repeated, I will not get married without it. Pei! Master Chow called from the inn. The fight with Widow Yan must have ended, for now the shouts were for Pei. Where are you? Both girls looked up alarmed. With haste, Pei removed the comb, and Mei Ling put the bracelet back into its pouch and in her box. Then, scampering like a rabbit, Pei crossed over the inn's yard, running past Rindy and the wall without even a second glance. Rindy stared. The wall was blank. His carefully arranged message of Pei is a melonhead was gone, for, without his noticing, the snails had slowly crawled back to the shelter of the shaded garden, leaving only a trail of ooze behind them.